All good on that side? Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. This is your early morning entertainment before the real events of the day kick off here. So we've got a sparse crowd. Feel free to kind of keep networking or listen in as well for the conversation over the course of the next few minutes. I'm Kyle McNulty, investor at In-Q-Tel and the host of the Secure Ventures podcast. And with me here is Vincent, the CEO at Bricklayer. And over the next few minutes here, we're going to be recording a live podcast talking through Adam's story, what he's built at Bricklayer, and his career getting to where he is today. So again, we're looking forward to the conversation here and getting to share a little bit more about the story.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vincent. I'm the CEO of a startup called Bricklayer AI. I'm based here in the DC area. And I've been doing cybersecurity a really long time, and I haven't quit quite yet. So my career in cybersecurity started at the MITRE Corporation. Great place to get started. Then I did 3 startups. My first was a company called Layer 7 Technologies, and I started their federal practice. They were all about APIs and API security and allowing the government to integrate across different boundaries, government agencies, classification domains, and whatnot. And I did that for about 6 years, had a great run, learned a lot about how to be an entrepreneur and how to start a company. And so in 2011, I was ready to jump in with both feet. And I started a company that most of you know as ThreatConnect. So I founded that company. It was then called Cybersecurity, and we had a product called ThreatConnect that proved to be really complicated from a go-to-market perspective. So we ended up changing the name. We rose about $14 million to the balance sheet, and then I sold that business in 2019 to an organization up in the Northeast called Providence Strategic Growth. Stayed on as CEO till 30 million in annual recurring revenue, which was just a great ride. Had about 250 customers around the world, and I left that business in 2022. Took some time off, which was just an amazing experience. I've got 4 kids that were all born during the ThreatConnect journey, and I got a chance to spend just a lot of time with them. But then, ChatGPT happened, and I'm a computer scientist and very technical, and I was just blown away at its ability to completely change the paradigm of how humans integrate with computers. And so I started Bricklayer early 2023, bootstrapped it for a year and a half, and then rose a little bit of money last year to staff up the R&D team, and just kicked off my go-to-market here in January.
Awesome. Well, we'll certainly spend some more time talking about each one of those different sections, but I really want to go back to actually part of your early career, which is when you're at MITRE, more of an individual contributor, software engineer kind of role, and then you make the transition to Layer 7. What was it like for you stepping into that first kind of like true leadership role as more of a CTO, having to manage people as opposed to just writing the code yourself?
Yeah. So I had a remarkable opportunity at MITRE that many people don't have. And then I came into MITRE with the goal of becoming an expert in what was then called the net-centric capability of the government was spending a lot of time talking about. So this was basically the advent of XML, web services, SOAP, and service-oriented architecture. And I joined MITRE right when that revolution was starting and was asked to immerse myself in it. So you have a lot of really smart people at MITRE, as I'm sure many people in the room know. They're all PhDs of crazy things. But this was a new technology, and I was like 20-some years old and just super excited about it. So I had an opportunity at MITRE to teach classes. I had a grant where I looked at a lot of the same concepts that I'm now building into Bricklayer. And I had a great opportunity to become an expert in this technology. So you can imagine that when I decided to leave MITRE, the startups that were focused on that technology took interest. And the hardest challenge that I had was deciding which one to go to.
Yeah, and then what about when you actually took on that new role and had a team under you, what were some of the new kind of challenges that you had to face, or how you had to kind of develop your own personal skill set in order to accommodate just a very new focus?
So I think that something that's really important as an entrepreneur is to be very comfortable in the technology and the product, and so that as a core is what makes an entrepreneur powerful. I was very good at that. I was very good at selling the vision of what at Layer 7 would do for government agencies. And I was very good at the strategy of understanding where the government agencies needed Layer 7 to go to make sure that we were there when they needed it. The opportunity to learn more about sales and marketing, to understand how to hire the right salespeople, and to understand how a sales process worked. I learned all of that on the fly, and I would say that I'm still learning a lot of those things, but it was a great opportunity to throw myself into the deep end and learn.
Yeah, well, that's actually a perfect transition, because the way you just described that sounds a whole lot more like a CEO type role than it does a CTO role in terms of the marketing, go-to-market strategy for the company as a whole. So from a timeline standpoint, you're at Layer 7 kind of mid to late 2000s, and then you end up starting ThreatConnect in, I think it's like 2011 or so.
Yep.
What was that decision like to go out and kind of start something from the ground up at this point?
Yeah, so I think you have to kind of look inside yourself, and when I look inside myself, I always, since I was a kid, wanted to be a CEO, wanted to build companies, wanted to be a leader. And the opportunity to join Layer 7 was a great one, in that I learned so much from so many smart people, and I really bonked up on all the things that I didn't understand. And so I really felt ready in 2010 to jump into ThreatConnect. I was ready as a sales and marketing leader. I was ready as a technologist and a product visionary, and all I required was some guts. So I think it was time, and it was time to go out alone, and it turned into a good success.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to take what you said at face value of, oh, I knew that I always wanted to be a CEO, because I think in general, anyone in the business world sees the CEO position as kind of like the pinnacle of achievement within this whole ecosystem, right? But where do you think that interest actually came from when you were younger? Like why did you have this lasting desire to be a CEO and be kind of on top of it all?
So there's nothing better than having a group of people around you, and everyone's marching in the same direction, and you're doing something really powerful that you couldn't do by yourself. And whether you're a captain of a fire company, or you're in the police, or you're a pilot, there's just power in direction and getting people and strategy all to work together. And so ever since I was young, I've always loved the idea of a team and employing a team to go do things. And I think that the only thing different from being a captain of a sports team is in a security startup, it's a lot more nuanced. There's a lot more assumptions. There's a lot more strategy in terms of timing and the thing you're doing. And so for me, that's a great strategy game. But again, it comes down to alignment of a team towards a common goal.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's go back to the ThreatConnect story on kind of a larger scale. You ended up being there for, I think, almost 12 years.
Yeah, 12
or so?
years. It's a very long time. Longest startup ever.
Right. Okay, well, there you go. When you first started it, how long did you expect to be working on it? There's kind of the classic mantra that it should take 10 years and make sure you're geared for that. But I'm sure in your mind you're thinking,
2 years.
This is a perfect idea.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing is that building a startup is all about timing, and you wanna get. I always use the analogy of it's like surfing. You wanna get paddle hard enough to get on the wave, but not so hard that you get crushed by the wave. And in ThreatConnect, I started in 2011, and the concept of it, based on the work I had done at MITRE and then Layer 7, was about connecting APIs of security products, ThreatConnect. Guess what? Maybe wasn't around in 2011. APIs, like they didn't exist, and if they existed, they were vendor specific. You couldn't connect to them, and you definitely couldn't use them in any kind of productized way. And so we were well ahead of the market, and we were well behind that wave. And so the wrong thing to do was go big and not make the crest of the wave. And so we decided to bootstrap. We did that for 4 years,
Wow.
which really slowed down our product development. We did that by selling manpower to places like National Security Agency. So early on, I had taken Cybersecurity and I had put it into a process with NSA to get our facilities clearance and to make sure it was ready when I was ready to start something. And that ended up being sort of our saving grace and our opportunity to bootstrap the company for about 4 years. We built the product to a point where we were selling it to the likes of AT&T and Verizon and Chevron, and then I knew it was time to raise money and get off to the races.
And like you just mentioned, there's an element of kind of waiting for the market to mature over the course of that 4 years where you're bootstrapping. But I also imagine the kind of product vision and product strategy might have changed a bit over that period as well. Was there anything significant as you look back and say, okay, when we first started, this is maybe the direction we're headed, but 4 years later?
It wasn't 4 years later that I had a little bit of an identity crisis. It was probably 2015. So we raised the $4 million in 2014. We staffed up the go-to-market function, and things were like cooking. So 2015, we got another $15 million in Series B money, and growth was amazing. Sales team was doing great. We were, sitting on top of the world, you could say. But at that time, we had a vision for continuing to build towards the automation side of our strategy. So intel and data was the first step. Then decision-making and action were the next 2 steps. But we had a bunch of competitors that came into the market. They were all focused on intel only and integrating into the SIEM and other security products to produce the actionability. And so we put our larger strategy on hold at that time. And it wasn't until really 2017 that we started going, we should probably get back to our original vision. And the reason for that, unfortunately or fortunately, was we were seeing the market shift, and our original vision should have been the right one to work on a year or 2 beforehand.
Can you talk a little bit more about that competition piece? And we're going to come back to this with Bricklayer, to be sure. But I've heard all kinds of different opinions and kind of approaches around managing competition as a startup, ranging from you should be thinking about kind of where you fit in the market and how you position against the other competitors, to we're just going to keep doing our thing, and as long as we're providing value, we're not going to worry about the competition even existing. How did you think about it at that time?
So I think this is a good point to bring the audience in. So you have West Coast versus East Coast up here. And so many of the people in this room are East Coast investors. They're East Coast startups. We think differently about go-to-market and building companies than the West Coast investors do. And so I'm a graduate of that program, having put 14 million-ish into equity financing, and then building a cash flow break-even company that got to 30 million in annual recurring revenue, and then sold it. Where my competition from the West Coast is still trying to figure out how to get to an exit. So the answer, in my opinion, is build a really powerful company. And a really powerful company shouldn't be confused with a lot of money spent on marketing. And a West Coast strategy is a lot of relationships, a lot of money, a lot of the relationships helping the company. And on my side, I believe that you start with the product, then the customer, and you build something that can scale, and you raise money to fund that strategy. And if you do that, you produce a powerful company, and if you produce a powerful company, great things happen.
Yeah.
So I think that I welcome the competition. Sometimes I don't think it's a fair fight, but I think that the way that I approach building companies and the way that a lot of East Coast entrepreneurs approach it is ultimately a better way than what I see from the West Coast.
Sure. Why do you think it is in 2025 there still is this kind of cultural difference between how the West Coast and East Coast ecosystems think about building companies when, as a whole, everything has become so much more connected? There's plenty of kind of cross-investment, let's say, of like companies on the East Coast selling to companies on the West Coast, or investment firms on the West Coast investing in the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about that?
Well, my wife didn't understand this until she watched Silicon Valley. So
Sure,
I think that show definitely demonstrates how this is happening. The culture is just different. The West Coast startup culture is completely different than the East Coast. I talk to investors all day long on both coasts, and I have to switch my brain when I talk to West Coast investors versus East. They're just more aggressive. They're more excitable. The opportunity being really big drives a lot of their behavior, versus East Coast investors just happen to be more conservative and a little more tactical in how they think.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's go back to the ThreatConnect story. You end up acquiring a company at some point during this period. Was it Nehemiah?
Yeah, Nehemiah.
Nehemiah.
Yeah, so I mentioned, that we were super excited about our go-to-market, and we probably put some of our plans on hold for too long. Our plan had really three dimensions. The first was we wanted to be the best at understanding the adversary or the threats landscape, or in that world of threat intelligence. We wanted to be able to provide the best fuel for decision making, and in that you had analytics. And then finally, we had a vision of providing the best actionability or ability to automate a security decision based on that really powerful intelligence and really powerful decision-making capability. So unlike the status quo SOAR that was more of a RPA with rules, we've thought that an intelligence-driven automation was ultimately the future, and this was 2010 vision being brought to bear in 2017 and beyond. One of those opportunities that was driven by really an analogy was we always called ourselves Salesforce for security. And I talked to people all day long about why I used that analogy. It was because Salesforce is transformational in terms of the sales and marketing process, brings data to the fingertips of the rep or the person that needs to make decisions, and ultimately can be automated to a point. If you think about what the pure value proposition of Salesforce is it demonstrates what your revenue is going to be. It's the value prop that everyone around the table understands. And in cybersecurity, we talk about risk being that value proposition that we produce in terms of mitigating, but we can't quantify that. We can't say what that is really worth to the business. And so, we always were looking at a way to quantify our value as that operations platform. And the best way to do that would be to say, this is what you're protecting. And the company Nehemiah was a local company. I think some of their founders may even be here today. Had a remarkable capability that they had built that allowed all that data that ThreatConnect was harvesting to turn into something that the business could look at and say, this is the value of the risk that we're mitigating. If we do not protect this, it's going to result in $1 million a day in losses. And so this is 2020-ish. We had sold off our government services business unit for basically one-time revenue, which was the part of the business that we had used to bootstrap for 4 years. And I had some cash, and I had an opportunity to lean in on what I thought was going to be transformational for the CISO and for the security team, and so that really drove the deal.
What was the decision like at that time? I mean, as a growing company, I think there's this idea that, we have the best technical talent, and we have the capability to kind of build anything that's in our broader product vision. You mentioned the nice tailwinds of having the cash on hand where an acquisition maybe makes sense, but what was that like for you to say, there's actually someone out there who's maybe already built the version of this that we need, as opposed to building this ourselves?
So when we decided to build the SOAR ourselves, we did go to market and look at acquiring, and we just didn't see anything in market that was technically what we wanted.
Sure.
And if I could go back in time, I actually think I still would have driven the M&A activity, though, because what I missed is the market perception of acquisition versus building something and then taking it to market. You immediately are known as a company with a thing when you buy another company with a thing, but when you create the thing yourself, you are asking the market to accept you as a new version of that thing. So hindsight's 2020. We ended up building our SOAR product. It resulted in increased revenue and customers. But when it came to the acquisition of Nehemiah, I didn't want to repeat that. I wanted to have instantaneous customers, market share, and the ability to go to market with being a leader in that space.
Yeah. And thinking about that perception piece, I think that's a really interesting insight. Do you think that holds true even if the startup that you're acquiring has little to no revenue, little to no logos?
Yeah, so they had more logos than many of their competition, and that was a very new space at the time. What they had was a technology vision that was very well aligned to us. So remember, back in the beginning of risk quantification, there was 2 ways of doing it, and everyone else chose the other way, which was basically a data modeling exercise that would take weeks or months to do, very consultant oriented. So that's exactly the antithesis of what I wanted. I wanted that revenue-like value proposition to come from the data that we already had, not from a bean counter type of spreadsheet. So they were positioned and aligned for kind of a 1 + 1 = 5, given what we already had in the technology.
Looking back on the acquisition now with the benefit of hindsight, is there anything that you would have done specific that's different?
I would have assimilated it into the ThreatConnect product faster. So I think that when you acquire a company, the first thing you want to do is make sure, again, it goes back to the people. You want to protect the people from feeling like they're in jeopardy, et cetera. So I kept them separate within ThreatConnect as their own culture, ecosystem, product, and strategy. And I think many people in the room that have done any kind of acquisition would say probably the same thing as me, is I wish I would have assimilated them sooner, the product vision, the roadmap, and made sure that we were all kind of working as a single team.
Yeah, great answer. So thinking about the kind of end of the ThreatConnect journey and moving us forward here, when we first started talking about this, we mentioned the 12 years you were there for. What was the decision like for you to step away and kind of move on to the next chapter of your journey?
So, any leader at some point needs to look at, where they're at and, move their cheese. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's one of my favorite books. And the ThreatConnect journey was changing. We had people that owned a majority of the company that wanted the strategy to be different than what I wanted it to be and what I wanted it to be all along. And so either I needed to be very comfortable changing what my goalposts look like personally, or I needed to realize that it was time for a change. And so that change was, I don't want to be a CEO of a slow-moving, company. I want to be doing something very disruptive. And given our size and our owners, they wanted to start moving in a different direction, and that's a great direction for their strategy, but not so much for mine. So I decided to leave and sort of roll the dice that I would figure out what to do next, which was a little bit of a journey, to be honest. Like I went from the right thing for me to do is to work for a PE-backed startup, because that's what I'm leaving, is a growth stage company. And that's where I belong. And then I interviewed and thought about it, and I realized, man, I'm going to be miserable in a growth stage company. And so then I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go find an earlier stage company and move in as a CEO. But there's not very many of those. And so there's always a joke in the entrepreneurial community that sometimes you create your own job when you can't get a job. And so, luck would have it that the technology evolved rapidly. This incredibly disruptive business change was going to happen because of what was happening in AI. And I was also looking for a job, and my wife really wanted me to find one. And so I created my own opportunity.
Yeah, and obviously the ChatGPT moment was very transformative for a lot of people, a lot of industries. Do you remember your first experience with ChatGPT where you were like, oh, this is really going to be something, this has some legs, and this might be my next avenue for a company?
Yeah, so for me, the idea of interacting with the chat interface of ChatGPT was a novelty, like many people, but it was like kind of mind-blowing in that it truly felt to understand what I was saying. The real sort of mind-blowing, like this is what I'm going to go do, happened when I started feeding it specific data sets that I knew to be accurate. So it goes back to my intelligence days at ThreatConnect of if you integrate very powerful data into a process of analyzing it, producing decision-making fuel, and then taking action, you can transform the way that you do something. Well, what I found was that the combination of a large language model, but fueled with very specific data that I knew to be the right fuel for the decision making, that it would produce a decision akin to the human being. And that happened in like January of 2023. And then in March, I basically incorporated and brought on engineers. And, by the way, what your wife likes less than getting a job is I'm not going to pay myself for about a year or a year and a half. And by the way, we're also going to pay for employees out of our own bank account. So for a year and a half, we were super uncomfortable at home.
Yeah. And I guess that's part of the journey, is kind of taking that risk, taking that step. Mm-hmm. The guts, I think, is the term you used earlier, right? So thinking about Bricklayer then, you decided to tackle this kind of automated/autonomous SOC analyst, where you can do some of that reasoning on behalf of the analyst as opposed to, relying on the manual tasks that exist today. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very clear opportunity for AI within the cybersecurity world today. A lot of people who've worked in and around security operations centers certainly see the level of manual work that goes on there and the opportunity for automation. In some ways, it's an extension of SOAR and kind of what you were doing at ThreatConnect in a way. But there's also a ton of other potential use cases where it could fit in, right? There's companies that are doing it for digesting threat intel reports and converting that into some other kind of like machine-readable format. So I'm curious what the process for you was like to say, we think the AI SOC analyst, or I think, rather, the AI SOC analyst is the right use case to tackle here. Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I would say that I kind of did dream in the beginning of doing something much more relevant for like the masses, like, something revenue generating or something that supports marketing people.
Sure.
Anything outside of cybersecurity, because we all dream of doing something different in our careers, but the reality is it just kept on coming back to my 10,000 hours are in cybersecurity. That's where I know the most investors. That's where I know the most customers, and so when I thought back on all the CISOs that I had talked to over the years, and all of the customers that I had helped, the one problem was manpower. It was the difference between success with a software product they acquired, or that software product churning was based on whether they had the right people in the seat. And so it was, I begrudgingly said, I guess I should do another cybersecurity startup.
And so within that process, I mean, you mentioned the importance of the churn within the SOC related to a SIM tool, but what were some of the other areas that you maybe considered within cyber, or did that one really just kind of stick out and hit?
So the core of cybersecurity in the world that I'm really comfortable in is operations. It's managing the security controls and monitoring and doing incident response and validating that you're minimizing risk. I was never involved in compliance, GRC. That just wasn't my strength. And so I really focused on the thing I'm most comfortable with. The thing that I had the most opportunity to disrupt. And in most organizations, I do dream of selling something that's easier to sell, but in most organizations, there's so much pain felt in the staffing and retention of employees and the ability to make those employees effective in the SOC. And the larger the organization, the more people they need to do that job. And so when you're selling a product akin to a staff augmentation company, but a technology version, the place to go is where they need the most manpower.
Yeah. Okay, and I asked you this question earlier with ThreatConnect. Over the first 4 or so years, while you were bootstrapping, how did your vision or strategy change? You have a kind of similar story with Bricklayer, where you have that first year and a half where you're funding it yourself and bringing these team members on board. The market evolved significantly over that period of time as well. How did your kind of overall strategy change during that period?
So, believe it or not, what we started doing in beginning of 23 is still the exact same thing we're doing today.
Okay.
So I believed back then and still today that what we're modeling is the human team that makes the SOC powerful. And that the approach we took, where we broke that team down into individual AI, we called them specialists up until recently when the market told us that name is no longer correct. They're AI agents. We were using AI agents before it was cool. Sure. And we were solving the SOC's problems by taking multiple AI agents that are each specialists in their own specific tasks and putting them together as a team and harnessing that, akin to what your human team is doing. So there's zero that's changed. The vision is exactly today the same as it was when I started.
What about on the technical side? What has been the biggest technical hurdle in actually bringing this to fruition? Is it the integrations with all the different tools to get the data? Is it training the model?
That might actually be something that I would say I did learn over the process. So when we first started, and I think this is still the vision, but it's not necessarily the reality today, I viewed AI agents as not having a user interface. That AI agents would use the software that you as a customer were already using in the same way that your human employees used it, and you would interact with them outside of the place where they ran or worked in terms of the technology. What I found was that it's really, really hard to provide the contextualization of how an AI agent did their job when the human today puts their information into Jira. And so the human wrote this nice Jira comment, and then the manager looked at it and either agreed or disagreed with it. If they disagreed with it, guess what they did? They went to the employee and they said, how did you get to this conclusion? And what we were missing in our vision and our product was like, how do we allow the manager to look at how Bricklayer did all that work to get to the result? And we realized probably a year ago now that the customer was going to need to use a user interface of some kind in order to not only onboard the agents into their organization and configure them to use the appropriate tools and do the right processes and then give them feedback, but also to see exactly the step-by-step process the agent used to get to the result.
And is that something that you've been able to do at this point? My understanding is that's still a fairly complex problem.
The Bricklayer differentiation story against all those well-funded West Coast companies is that we didn't approach it as a black box in any way, shape, or form. We view every single task that an AI agent does as needing to be able to be human reviewed. And every task that the agent does, down to this agent uses this specific cybersecurity tool to do this specific thing, needs an audit trail, needs to be able to be evaluated by a human being. And as a step in a multi-step process, if that particular task is wrong, then we have to short circuit the entirety of the process and say that the process is now wrong. So, I think that this is one of the reasons we've been so successful in the market, is that customers are really appreciating this level of detail that we're providing.
Sure. And maybe help explain, how much do you rely on the existing models that are provided open source or otherwise and available on the internet today versus training your own kind of version of an LLM based off of one of these?
I'll use the analogy that I use pretty frequently because I do feel that the answer that some people want to hear is that we had a bunch of PhDs in my basement that built a model that makes all of this really easy. But actually, I would argue that the model is only one part, an important part of the system that we're building, and that model is improving at a rate that we should not build our own engine within our system, but we should rather build the system around it and expect the model to get better over time. And so the analogy that I use a lot is, we're going to Mars, we're building a spaceship. Do we also want to build an engine? Or is there a great company that builds engines and we want to build the ship in such a way that we can keep on iterating on the engines as those engines improve? We've taken the latter approach, but we do have some intellectual property around how Bricklayer plans and executes in a collaborative nature that is kind of our special sauce, and it sits outside of the agent's reasoning model, but it's still a model in itself.
Yeah. Does that become stressful then, where with each new model release you have to maybe significantly revamp the product?
So I wouldn't say revamp, but there's absolutely a challenge ahead of all AI development efforts, which is that models being undeterministic in their outcomes cannot be put through a traditional QA cycle. And so it used to be that we would hire a QA team to launch 150 tests against our software, and they were all 0 or 1. Well, now every single test results in a fuzzy conclusion, and you need to confirm that today's output of your model is better than it was yesterday. And in a qualitative way, you're forced to use other models to do that. And so it's very challenging to do QA, benchmarking, and confirm that you're moving forward and not backwards. And the way that we approach that is we don't change models frequently. When we do, we expect to move backwards for several weeks in order to move forwards.
Sure.
And we make those decisions as infrequently as possible, but we do plan accordingly to embrace the latest model that has a stepwise function of what our product can do.
So now you're running DeepSeek on the back end?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just kidding. Okay, and we've talked a little bit about competition and your kind of philosophy around competition. So I feel like I have an idea a bit of where your answer is going here, but this is an extremely crowded market today. Plenty of well-funded companies who are trying to tackle the same problem. How do you think about not just your advantage in the short term, but thinking about kind of maintaining an advantage over time where these other companies have the resources to ultimately copy your approach if it's something that proves extremely successful in the market?
Yeah, so I guess, what was scary is when I was telling my wife that we're going to hire someone and we're going to do this, and I'm pushing off, trying to find a job, and no one was doing what I was doing. Like, it was a vacant space. There was the cybersecurity co-pilot didn't exist. No one was talking about using generative AI in cybersecurity. That was scary. I actually am comforted greatly by the vast number of competitors in this space. It means that I'm not alone in thinking there's a large TAM here. It means that very smart investors are spending a lot of money from their LPs to back those companies. And there's a lot of people that all believe this is the future. The question is, how do you win in a competitive space? And I would say you have to do something different. And the thing that I always focus on is my product doing something different. So marketing will follow, but the product has to be at its core differentiated from your competition and approach the problem differently. If we're all sharks and we're in shark-infested waters and we're all doing the same exact thing, we're all just bumping into each other. But when you're a smart shark, you find a way to do something unique and different, and you pick up the scraps that all the other sharks are missing. And so, being an East Coast company and being funded by East Coast investors, I have an opportunity to be highly focused on not just following the same playbook as the West Coast companies.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and then thinking about the technical side, you talked about the challenge that you overcame in terms of building the UI that an analyst can interact with or a manager can query to get additional context. What's the biggest remaining technical hurdle as you think about the current state of Bricklayer today and where you really want to take it?
The biggest hurdle that we all face in AI is around trust. And how do we go from where we're at today, where I think most people have a natural disbelief that AI technology can truly do the things that many people think it can do. And it's ultimately going to come down to proving it to them and gaining their trust one at a time, and until you have a corpus of people that are saying, yes, this is really game-changing for me to do my job. And I think that's not a technology problem. That is a time and a human problem that we all are going to encounter in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very, very educated perspective on the cybersecurity market as a whole, right? How many times have we heard it's not a technology problem, it's a human problem when it comes to all the breaches? And so clearly well-versed in the market here. So Adam, thank you so much for the time and the wisdom here. I think some super unique lessons from the experiences that you've gone through. Can we get a big round of applause for Adam here?
Thank you. Thanks, Kyle.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone who listened for a few minutes. Excited to kick off the rest of the day and everything that's coming from the blue team here. So thank you.
Thanks.